Hello, Jeremy.
Now, I thought I knew a bit about you through your brilliant sort of political business career and background and stuff, but I knew nothing of this until this morning. So I appreciate you've decided you need to talk about it.
Well, to be honest, I didn't, and I never really spoke about it. I didn't decide not to, but it never came up, and it was never part of my ministerial brief or anything like that. But a great colleague of mine, Theo Clark, she has a book about breaking the taboo, about birth trauma, and about the awful maternity services. And she did a podcast, and she phoned me up and she said, "Could you come on my podcast?" I said, "I don't think I qualify. I didn't get that far. I didn't actually give birth. I didn't have a traumatic birth because I didn't get that far in the process." And she said, no, she's moving on to the second series, and she wanted to talk about other wider issues, in particular fertility, and in particular, going through IVF, how you cope with that, and particularly if it doesn't work, how you cope with it. And so I said, sure, I'd be happy to talk about it if you think it helps. I mean, it was about 20 years ago. I'm 58 now, so it's a long time in the rearview mirror, but
and it involves
it still happens.
Yeah, understood. And just let's go back before it, because it involves us understanding a bit more about you, because you're one of these rare politicians who came to politics late, having actually had a proper job, and you actually were in business. So tell us about your business career.
Well, I had many jobs. So, I had Saturday jobs. But my first full-time job was I was an apprentice in a car factory in a place called Kirby, which is just outside Liverpool, where I grew up. And it's funny because people have always been sniffy about apprenticeships, but where I grew up, it was like getting the golden ticket. So I was always, super, super happy with that. And it became a degree apprenticeships. They sponsored me all the way to go 1 day a week. So I worked there for about seven and a half years. And then after that, I used that experience to move to NatWest Bank. That's when I moved to London. I spent a bit of time in Tokyo getting the chip and pin that we all have now in the 90s that didn't exist. So we had to kind of get that technology developed. And then I moved to Madrid. I was there for 8 years in Madrid. And actually, that's where I got married. And that's where I did part of the fertility treatment. And my husband was in the UK. So that was also, I guess, part of the difficulty. But and then I actually became a politician randomly, and I do think it's a really great thing if there are any people who are in business or have had a long career and think, actually, I think I could do a better job. The reality is you can if you put yourself forward. So I think I'd love a load more people when they're at, the sort of last part of their career. I was 49 when I got elected. I'd started work at 16 to come along, because there's so much you can bring, so much experience and really practical things. You've just done a load of things before. So I think it's a great model. But there aren't that many that do it in that way. Most of them go in much younger. After doing PPE at Oxford, of course. I missed that bit too.
So at some point during this very successful business career, you decide you want to become a mum, or it just naturally happens that starts to be in your thoughts. Is that right?
Yeah, my grandmother had 13 children. Can you imagine? So my dad's one of 13, and 11 of them survived all the way through to adulthood. So I have a really big family, and, kids have always been part of it. I think I've been babysitting since I was about the age of 12. So I just assumed, because everybody else around me, they seem to get pregnant at the drop of a hat. There was always somebody having a baby. So I just assumed that when I was ready, it would just happen. And so I think I was sort of in my mid-30s, which, is probably old by a generation ago's standards, but probably is quite common by today's standards. And it was only when I started and then it didn't happen. And you think, oh, maybe it's because I'm busy or whatever. And we were sort of travelling around a lot for business. But then you start to get checked out, and then you realise, no, there is actually a problem. And then I started down the IVF route, and I did one of those in Spain and one of those in the UK. And then when you're told at the very end that brutal thing, which is you've got a less than 1% chance, in a way I'm grateful to the guy for telling me, because it was so stark and brutal that, I wasn't going to continue with IVF with a less than 1% chance. I'm not sure how many people get that blunt a message. And, and I know people now who are going on and they're on their third and fourth and fifth attempts at IVF. And it's very, it is very, it's an emotional roller coaster, because with every round, you're sort of, a little bit of you, it gets more and more worried and less hopeful that it's going to happen for you. And then, sometimes that's it. it's just not going to happen. You have to move on.
And this is very much a private battle at the time. But what's clear from your story is that in your professional life, people are making assumptions. And that the assumption is, well, you made a choice here, you've gone for business, and therefore you're not being a mum, and that's your choice.
Yeah, completely. And I think there'll be a lot of people who have been senior businesswomen that people have made the assumption the only reason you've got to the top is because you chose not to be a mother, you chose to focus everything on your career, with the sort of title being that, you're kind of selfish and that was all you were thinking about. I actually think there's probably a lot of women, and I think probably even Theresa May was one, that have had the desire to have a child, but then it didn't work, and they put their all into their career because it didn't work.
I suppose there is. There's something on there, isn't there, where the person realises that they won't have children and they go put their head down at work almost. Is it to hide from it? I don't know.
Well, I suppose you don't have the distraction, because the thing about parenthood is, it is all-encompassing, particularly when your children are younger. And, particularly if you've got international business careers, I mean, trying to juggle all of that is very difficult. You normally need one person to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more at home. And quite often that is the mother. So it does sometimes have an impact. And I've seen many people who I've employed in my business career who have taken a backseat for their kids and it has had an impact in their career. And it's always very difficult to get back to the same trajectory you were on. And it always struck me that women do fantastically well at exams, at university. When they get their first jobs, they're normally quite high earning and certainly equal, if not out earning men. And then it all changes. And that is usually because of the family, which is one of the reasons why when we were in government, we were very keen, myself and Jeremy Hunt, to put the free childcare in, because at least that does provide a little more flexibility, even though it's only 30 hours a week.
Did you ever have a moment where someone made a comment like, well, of course, you've chosen not to have children and that's why you're so successful, or a version of that, and you have to say, right, wait, stop right there and explain to them?
Yeah, occasionally I've said to people, I didn't have my own family. I have 2 stepchildren, 2 IVF bills, and that's as far as I got. And when you say that and say 2 IVF bills, you can see, the horror in their face. People don't mean to be mean or cruel. They just make an assumption, and then suddenly they realise it changes the whole dynamic, because not only did you want a child and you didn't have a child, but they also know that they couldn't imagine life without their child. So suddenly they feel, really, really kind of bad about the assumption they made. And occasionally I have said that because, I don't know why people make that assumption. There's loads of reasons why people don't end up having a family. Quite often, sometimes you might not find the right person in time to have a family. It's when you look at and think of all the things that need to line up and go right, you do wonder how, we used to have sort of lots of teenage pregnancies and stuff, because there's so much that needs to be
maybe it's best
right
to do it
time, right
without
place.
thinking, I don't know, all the planning.
Definitely youth matters, but of course we're all still, in school and university, probably during some of the peak fertility years.
Actually. That's so true.